Inserting a positive male role model in the lives of young men can prove to pay tremendous dividends when it comes to their overall personal and professional development in life. Research has demonstrated mentoring relationships play a significant role in the lives of young people. A study published by the National Mentoring Partnership revealed young people with consistent mentors are 55% more likely to enroll in college, 78% more likely to volunteer on a regular basis, and 130% more likely to land leadership positions. Dylan Roos is a masculinity coach who grew up with one of Australia's most famous athletes and coaches as a father, which allowed him to develop leadership skills from an early age, and he's grown up around football clubs his entire life, which has given him experience with plenty positive male role models, which informs and influences the work he does today by mentoring young people through his signature program entitled Prince to King. Roos joined me this week to talk about the positive influences male role models can have in young men's lives, his personal life story in athletics, mentorship, and so much more. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to learn about how you make a difference in the lives of young men through mentorship in sports. Great to see you today, brother, and thank you so very much for being here.
Thank you. I'm ready when you are.
Absolutely. Now, Dylan, I know that your father had a major influence on how you grew up as the son of a famous athlete and coach as a father. So tell me, how did that affect the way you look at mentoring people today? Because I know that had a big impact on you.
Yeah, he's my number one role model in my life. Absolutely, he's my dad. And I'm really fortunate that I have such a great relationship with him still to this day. But, that wasn't always the case growing up. As I'm sure you can relate, is that we don't listen to our parents when we get to our teenage years, and there's a lot of friction, a lot of headbutting, especially between sons and fathers. And so, I was really fortunate that he got in place some great role models and some great mentors in mine and my brother's life. And so that really fast-tracked our development, really allowed us to learn from some of Australia's greatest athletes, greatest leaders, greatest role models. And then when I did get a bit older, a bit more mature, and started listening to Dad a bit more, then, it was awesome to have him on my team and being able to go to him and rely on his wealth of knowledge. And as well as my mum, my mum's been a great inspiration and a great role model for me too. She's a meditation teacher, and, she's, having mum and dad on my team has been such a huge benefit to me and my brother.
Yeah, absolutely. And from a broad perspective, Dylan, I'm wondering if you can tell me the positive impact that male role models can have on the lives of young men today, Bonnie, because growing up as a kid today isn't what it used to be. So how important do you think the influence of a male role model is, buddy?
I'd say it's the most important person in a young man's life, and probably as well, I would argue it's one of the more important roles in a young girl's life as well, because we know this through all the statistics that we see, and especially in America, 85% of those that are incarcerated come from fatherless homes. We know that young men need a model to understand their masculinity, understand their manhood, understand how they're meant to be showing up in the world. And without a male role model around, or a father figure or a father, it becomes incredibly difficult to decipher what kind of man we want to grow up and become, and what are the things that men do that are positive, what are the things that men do that are negative. And having someone guiding us in that path is so incredibly important, because, well, I mean, how else are you meant to grow up and become a young man, and a healthy, positive young man that's a good contributor to society, that's a leader of his family, a leader of his community, that is of service to those that are around him, that has good values? All of these things are instilled through a male role model, and through understanding that this is how we behave, this is how we don't behave. So, it's by far one of the most important roles, if not the most important role in a young man's life, because we need to know where we're going. We need to understand, that's the behavior I need to exhibit. That's the behavior I don't want to exhibit. And without that, we're lost. And we see this in young men. Young men are struggling today more than ever. And we've seen a massive rise in fatherlessness across America, across the world, really. And I think those two things are really intrinsically linked, is that young men are worse off than they've ever been, and fatherlessness rates are the highest they've ever been. And so I don't think that's a coincidence. I think there's a really strong correlation between those two things. And we've also, as a society, taken a step back from our communities and from that community feel of relying on a lot of different people to help us raise our kids, help us raise our young men. Now we're very individualized. We're very, quote unquote, independent. And as a result, parenting's become the hardest it's ever been, because we don't have a broad support network around us that can help us raise our young men. And for thousands of years, hundreds of years, cultures around the world all knew this as the universal truth, which was young men need as many people around them as possible as they enter into adolescence. And so we've now got the longest period of adolescence in history, in that we no longer take boys from boys and take them into manhood. And that is really detrimental, again, to our young men's, the young men in society and their development. And you can see it across the world, how much young men are struggling, but two, how little desire that they have to grow up. They don't want to take on responsibility. They don't want to enter into the adult world. They're happy living this life as Peter Pan. And so, the boy who never wants to grow up. And that's what we're seeing in a massive rise. And what I see in the work that I do mentoring young men is really a lot of it's about encouraging them to see the benefits in taking on more responsibility in their lives, and what the rewards of that will bring short term, but also long term in their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And you take all of these life lessons and what you've gone through personally, and you apply it to your flagship mentoring program called A Prince to a King. So I'm wondering if you can tell me all about the great work that you do through the program, Dylan.
Yeah. So for about 18 months now, almost 2 years, I've been working with young men in, as you said, the Prince to King mentoring program. And it has been one-on-one for the past 2 years. And I've just opened it up and created an actual online course now. So it's a 10-week course that takes the young men through all the subjects and categories that I wish I had as a young man, that I wish I was educated on when I was 14, 15, 16, all the way up to 23. That's who I work with. And so we go over things from, week 1, we're touching on habits and routine, through to week 6, week 7, we're talking about emotional intelligence and leadership. And really, the reason I'm so passionate about this work is because I remember what it was like to be a young man and struggling. I remember what it was like to be 18 years old, looking out into the world going, I've got no idea what I want to do with my life. Purpose. What's purpose? I grew up in a sporting family. I always thought I'd play sport. And I think a lot of young men in America can relate to that because they go from high school, they get college scholarships, they're told they're amazing, they're told they're the best, and then they leave college. They don't get drafted into the sport that they wanted to get into. And now it's like, oh, shoot, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And they probably just fall into a 9-to-5 that they don't love, that they don't enjoy. I think it's about 87% of Americans actively dislike their jobs or don't enjoy it. So only 13% of people are getting up every day or 5 days a week and enjoying what they're doing. And so I remember what that was like. I remember being 18, 19, 20, not knowing what I was doing, bouncing from job to job, studying at uni, not liking that. And then finally, or I say finally, but at 25, I found my purpose in working with men. And it's actually, today marks my 4-year anniversary for the first men's event that I put on with my dad back in Melbourne. I saw the memories pop up on my phone today. So thought that was really cool to say, wow, look at how far I've come in 4 years from putting on these events in Melbourne to now working with young men. And I love this work. I love it because nobody, or very, very, very few people are working with young men and educating and guiding. There's a lot of scrutiny on young men. There's a lot of, hey, you need to do better, do better, do better. Toxic masculinity, this, toxic masculinity, that. But very few people are actually taking the time to educate and to guide and to support these young men.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious to ask you about how showing emotion, strength, and masculinity are interconnected, because I think it's also important for men and young men to show emotion and can really be a source of strength. So I'm wondering your thoughts on that regard as well.
Yeah, mate, it's funny because the conversation for a lot of men and for a lot of young men is that vulnerability equals weakness, or some version of that. And in the work that I'm doing, I'm trying to explain and, again, take the time to show them that it's the actual opposite, that vulnerability equals strength, that in order to grow, in order to become more resilient, you need to embrace your vulnerability. You need to embrace the fear associated with opening up, with sharing parts of yourself for so many different reasons. And the main one that I talk about is, I talk about 2 different paths you've got in front of you. You can choose to go down the old stoic path of, and I love stoicism, so this isn't an attack on stoicism, because there's a real benefit to stoicism, but that old men don't cry, men don't show emotions path. And you walk down that path, and I've walked down that path, and you see, and I've experienced what comes of walking too far down that path. And so I use the analogy of you're walking down the path and you've got a backpack on, and every challenge that you face and every obstacle you overcome ends up putting more and more bricks into your backpack. And eventually, I don't care who you are, that backpack is going to become too heavy to carry. And so eventually, I don't care who you are, you'll have some form of a breakdown, some form of a falling apart, because you've just got too much shit that you're carrying around in your backpack. So and the best case scenario is some sort of breakdown. Worst case scenario is suicide, right? Because you're unable to carry what you've got on your shoulders, and you think that the weight of the world's on you, and it's you against the world, and there's no one else that experiences what you're experiencing. And so worst case scenario, we see a lot of men taking their own lives. Versus the other path, which is, as the obstacles arise and as you're overcoming these challenges, you're not holding on to the bricks in the backpack. What you're doing is through sharing what's going on in your life, through opening up, through vulnerability, through deep reflection as well, because that's also a part of vulnerability, is this self-practice of reflection, journaling, understanding what's going on internally. Through that, you're able to remove the bricks from your backpack, and you can keep going and going and going and going. You can walk down that path for as long as you want. Okay? Man number one has to stop eventually because it'll get too heavy. And also, man number one's not learning as much as he could be learning about himself, because vulnerability, as I said, takes that self-reflection practice. It takes the uncomfortable feeling of sitting in your emotions, which is vulnerability too, and understanding, well, why am I feeling these things? What's going on here? How did I get here? And so you're able to become more resilient as a result of sitting in that. Man number one's not doing that, right? He's got to keep moving. He's got to keep going. He can't sit there. He's got to man up. He can't cry. He can't feel. He's just got to keep going. Man number two goes, no, I can, and I can be resilient. I can do both of these things. And so what I talk about a lot with my boys is the balance between heart and backbone, right? We need these two things. And actually what I'm seeing is, with the young men that I'm working with, there's this lack of heart, but now also there's the lack of resilience. And so my dad's generation and the generation before him, they had a lot of resilience, but they didn't have a lot of heart. They didn't have a high EQ. They weren't in touch with their emotions. It was very just backbone. Now we're seeing a rise in heart, but also a decline in backbone. And so a lot of the kids don't have either now. They don't have backbone or heart. And so they're really, really struggling. And we need to find a healthy balance internally of the two, because at times life is going to get incredibly difficult and incredibly challenging. And you're going to need resilience. You're going to need backbone to overcome these challenges. And at times you're going to need to tap into your heart. You're going to need to tap into your emotional intelligence. You're going to need to be able to connect with the people around you, connect with your partner. You're going to be able to have to feel, so that you can empathize with the people around you and empathize with your own human experience. So the balance is so key.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dylan, I want to dive into your why, because you say you can simplify that for me in 3 points. And I always tell people, if you can find what your passion is in life and you're compassionate about it, you're really up on the roadmap to making a tangible and impactful difference. So tell me about how you define your why, buddy.
Yeah, it's funny because I've got 3 reasons for my why, so I love that. I'm prepared for this question. So number 1 is that feeling of leaving high school and not knowing what I wanted to do with my life, not knowing my purpose. And I think the education system is failing young people every single day, in that the only reason you go through high school and the only goal that they have is to get you into college or to get you into university. That's all they care about. So they only care about your marks, your grades. And what school, if the education system can change, they need to teach us more about things that apply to the real world for the everyday person. I think only 1 in 3 people are going on to college and university. So 2/3 of people in the United States that are going through high school have zero benefit to what school's teaching, because they're not going on into college, which is the only result or outcome that schools are after. And so I believe that schools need to do a much better job of rounding out their humans that they're trying to educate and trying to and really revamp it. But that's a big reason to my why, is if I can come in and teach these young men values, emotional intelligence, leadership skills, how to tap into their why or find their purpose and passion, then great. That is awesome, because that's exactly what I needed at that age. The second reason and why I'm so passionate about this work is, when I was 20 years old, I went through a really bad breakup with my girlfriend at the time, and resulted in me just making a bunch of bad decisions back to back to back. And I started drinking a lot. I didn't want to feel my emotions. I didn't want to sit in my pain, and I just wanted to get on with it and move on. So I drank a lot. I stopped working out. I started eating really unhealthily. And 6 months down the track of really bad habits, I found myself unable to get out of bed for a week. And so that was the start of my journey, because that week I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety. And so I was thrown into this world of, oh, I need to take better care of myself. I need to understand mental illnesses, but also how to take care of my mental health because I'm not doing a good job right now. And so that's a big part of my why too, is I don't want young men to have to go through the pit, the despair, the depression, the anxiety for them to then come out the other side and become better versions of themselves. I want to go, hey, learn from me, learn from my mistakes. Here's how we can take you from good to great. And then the third reason why I love this work and why I'm really passionate is because there has been a massive spotlight put on men over the last 20 years. And the only part of that conversation, or a massive part of the conversation, has been toxic masculinity. And I absolutely detest that statement. And so a big part of why I love working with men and love working with young men is I want to highlight the positive attributes of masculinity, the good things that men are doing, the necessary things that men are doing, and encourage them to step into their masculinity more, not disassociate or push their masculinity away. I want them to step into it and become men of substance, become heart-led men. And so a big part of my work is like, let's boost young men up. Let's create the next generation of incredible men.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dylan, I want to share just a little bit about myself personally and why I feel that I connect with you myself. Dylan, I was born with what's called spastic quadriplegia cerebral palsy. Simply means that I don't have enough oxygen in my legs to walk normally, and I use a walker and a wheelchair to get around. And one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast was it helps me sort of eliminate my social isolation and build a sense of community. I know that it's important to you to begin reshaping the way we have mental health conversations. So tell me, when you look at inclusion, diversity, and equity as it relates to mental health, what do you think of them, Dylan?
What do I think of inclusion, diversity, and equality?
As it relates to mental health, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think you touched on it right then. People want to belong, right? People want to feel a part of a community. They want to feel connected to other people. And I think that's a big driving force of equality. The equality conversation, the diversity conversation is people just want to feel like they belong, that they've got people they can rely on, that they are connected to some form of community. And so in relation to the mental health conversation, I believe that a lot of people think that they don't belong. I think a lot of people are in pain. I think a lot of people are struggling. And as a result of that, they are trying to find where they do belong. And I think it's great what you're doing. You have taken your circumstances and said, I'm not going to just be a victim and I'm not going to just be alone. I'm going to find a solution. I'm going to start a podcast, right? Great. That mentality is awesome. And I'll relate this back to my story, is when I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety, the first thing I thought, and I didn't know anything about mental illness back then. I didn't know anything at 20 years old. First thing I thought was, I'm not going to let this define me. This isn't going to be the story that I run with. Oh, I'm depressed. Oh, I'm anxious. And so I've never even, in the 8 years that I've been diagnosed with it, I've never said those words. I'm depressed. I'm anxious. What I'll say is I have depression, or I have anxiety, or I manage my depression or my anxiety, or I battle with it, but I've never self-identified as depressed or as anxious, because I never wanted to take my power away. I wanted to say, oh, this is outside of my control. I wanted to find the ways in which I could create control over my circumstances and then change the narrative around it. So for me, I was really in a bad way at 20 years old. As I said, I didn't get out of bed for a week. I was stuck drinking. I was miserable, depressed, anxious. I was horrible. And that trickled out for a while. But what I've been able to do over the last 8 years is developing really good habits that I know set me up for good mental health. And so I've now very rarely have a bad day where I can't do much, or my depression kicks up, or my anxiety. I really manage it well. And so I think with equality, diversity, and the mental health conversation, I think we need to take the victim mentality of woe is me out of the conversation and start to empower ourselves. Because no matter what we're talking about, if you come at it from, oh, this is out of my control, or, oh, life is happening to me and not for me, it is a recipe for failure in whatever the pursuit is, because you can't succeed if you're outsourcing your responsibility and your power to other people. The recipe for success is the complete opposite. It's, okay, life dealt me a shit hand, but what am I going to do with the cards? What am I going to actually do to make my life the best it can possibly do? If I just sit back and let the world determine what I can and can't do, if I sit back and let circumstances beat me down, which you might have every right to say, yeah, life is shit and dealt me a bad hand. You might have every right. But my point is, that mentality is not going to get you what you want, which might be more fulfillment, more connection, more belonging, more success, whatever it is. It's that mentality is not going to get you to where you want to go. And so we need to focus on the mentality so that we can propel ourselves into whatever place we want to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Dylan, I was fascinated to ask you about putting together the puzzle pieces of sort of reshaping masculinity for the modern man, and what a successful recipe in that regard looks like for you.
Yeah, I think it's empowering men to stand up and be proud of their masculinity. That's number one, because as I said, I believe that the last 20 years has just been an absolute beating on men, and has really resulted in men being afraid to stand in their masculinity, to stand in healthy forms of masculinity, right? And so I think the first thing in reshaping this conversation and reshaping masculinity is understanding it's good. I was on an interview a few months ago, and one of the co-hosts said there was nothing positive about masculinity. And that's not an uncommon theory or uncommon mentality in 2022. That's a pretty common thing to think. And so if that's where we're at, we have to change that. That can't stand, because 80% of men have masculine core energies, and all men are going to exhibit masculinity in some way because they're men, right? So what do you do with the rhetoric that masculinity is nothing bad? We can't do anything positive with society if that's our rhetoric. So reshaping masculinity looks like understanding it's necessary, good, positive, and needed in society. And then from that, we can start to develop and shape what we believe this modern man looks like, what positive masculinity looks like, healthy masculinity looks like. And for me, and the way that I define it is, again, a balance of heart and backbone. I think Aubrey Marcus calls it the warrior poet. And I love that, the warrior poet, the guy that can go to war, but also has that soft side where he loves deeply and is really connected to his emotions. So that's the modern balance of masculinity, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And Dylan, I'm wondering your thoughts on, when you work with young people, what's the key to instilling them with confidence, the independence to own their own decisions, and placing them on a path that really propels them in the direction they want to go?
Yeah. It's encouragement. I think a lot of young people have been cut off from encouragement. And when we look at that from an archetypal point of view, that's the king archetype's main function, or the second main. One is ordering and second is blessing. And we have been so cut off from the king archetype as a whole, and we can go into reasons as to why, but I've kind of touched on that already. But we have been so cut off from the blessings of kings, which is the blessings of our fathers or father figures, and then to break that down, the blessings of men. And when we can encourage our young men and give them support for the progress that they're making in their lives, you'll see them make a lot more progress. And it's really funny. We're working over the last couple of years, I've worked with young men that are doing really well and want to do even better. And I've worked with young men who are really struggling and just want to be doing okay. One thing that I found is super interesting is in some parents, progress isn't applauded. And so they might be, let's take an educational standpoint as an example. Let's say there's a boy that I'm working with who is consistently getting D's in school, and the parents want him to be getting better grades. And I take them from a D to a C, or it's really the boy taking himself from a D to a C. Majority of parents, instead of saying, wow, you've just improved, you've gone from a D to a C, that's great. What they do is they go, wow, you're only getting a C. Why didn't you get A's? And you would never see a young man go into the gym for the first time, start lifting weights, and a month later expect him to be Mr. Olympia, right? That would be completely unrealistic. But these parents and a lot of people are looking at where their young men are in their lives and expecting them to make massive progress in short periods of time. And the key to massive progress is, one, being patient, because it's going to take a longer time, but two, it's encouraging. If I'm struggling and I do something and I don't get applauded for it, my mentality goes, oh, I'm not going to do that again. There was no reward for doing that. Versus I do something and I get rewarded for it and I get applauded and I get the blessings from the king, then I'm going to continue to do it. And so that's it. That's my key message, is we need to be encouraging our young men more and more so that they can continually make progress in whatever pursuits they're after.
Yeah, and Dylan, I just want to follow up in that regard. I'm always curious to ask people like you, when you work with people and working to sort of change their mindset, how do you also help young men get over hard tragedy and things that may not always go their way in life? How do you teach young people perseverance and resilience as well?
Yeah. This is the balance, right? One is control what you can control. That's such a key message, is control what you can control. The more you focus on external circumstances, the more you focus on things that you can't control, the more difficult it's going to be to overcome these challenges. So there's a mindset shift in, okay, I can't control that, but I can control this. Then, secondly, it's understanding that, yes, you've just gone through something difficult. And so sit in it, learn from it, understand it better. Take the lessons that you can out of this experience. And once you've done that, then don't stay longer than necessary. Move out of that place. So what I see is, one, people just will never go to that place. And that's wrong for what I've already explained. But two, people will get stuck in that place. And that's equally unhelpful. And so it's difficult, it's like it's a balancing act, and it takes a lot of discernment of, have I gotten what I needed from this place and can I move out of it? And that's what we're trying to do. And that's what I'm trying to do with my clients, is go, let's get the lessons, let's spend some time here, but let's not spend too long here. But let's also make sure we do go there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Dylan, for me personally, it's important to do everything that I can to sort of build bridges of inclusion and really eliminate what I can gaps of sort of division amongst people. So I know I asked you earlier about inclusivity from a mental health perspective, but when you take it from a societal perspective types of division, how do you view the concept of inclusivity?
I think that the conversation, I think there's a lot of hypocrites in the conversation, in that there's a lot of people talking about inclusion and inclusivity. And then when there is people that fall outside of their own belief systems, they don't want to include them. And I see that on both sides in America, especially, is that from a societal point of view, there's just a lot of hypocrites. And so I would love to see the bringing together of people, this removal of them versus us mentality, and trying to find the common ground that we all have. And definitely one thing that I know is when I have a one-on-one conversation with someone, I don't care who it is, I'm probably going to find more places that we agree upon than we disagree upon. And so we need to humanize one another in the inclusion conversation, humanize the other side so that we can include each other in these big societal debates and topics. But no one wants to do that because that's really difficult. And also the way society's set up today, which has never really been set up, is that there are these mouthpieces for huge communities. So 1, 2, 5, 10 people speak for millions. And that's really difficult thing to do. Really difficult thing to do, to include, to have one person speaking on the behalf of 10 million. And so that's also really difficult. And also, what does our society love? It loves clickbait. It loves drama. It loves big fancy titles. So the only people we see on TV and being exposed to us on social media are the outliers. They are the far left and the far right. And so what that does is it makes us think, oh, this is what the other side thinks. The other side's crazy. When in reality, you have a conversation with the other side, they're probably a lot more centrist than you think. And the majority are probably a lot more centrist. It's just we give voices to a lot of the outsiders. So the inclusion topic and the inclusion debate must come from a place of genuine empathy and genuine understanding. When you find someone that you disagree with, you can't just dismiss them and think that they're an idiot or call them names. You have to go, oh, that's interesting. Why do you think that? What led you to this conclusion? And only then are we able to really provide inclusion. There's this great TEDx talk, and I can't remember the name of this guy, but he was an African-American guy in America, and he started going to KKK meetings and KKK rallies and befriending the members. And over the course of, I think, 10 or 20 years, he developed all these relationships with these KKK members and got hundreds of them out of the Klan. And I don't even know what the head of the Klan's called, or the different heads are called, but he even got one of the heads out. And I think that's a really great lesson, that when you if you're passionate about something and you want to make real change, you have to go and have conversations and really put in the effort to bring people to your side if that's what your goal is.
Yeah, and then you also talk about the relationship between men and women, and what do you think men want women to know, and the way women can best support men. So I'm wondering if we can dive into that topic a little bit as well.
Yeah, I think it's that men are really, the average man is really lonely and really struggling and doesn't have a great support network around them. And I think that's the main message that we as men would love women to know, is that we're not doing well, but we don't like to say that because women also don't want to see men fall apart. And Brené Brown talks about this in her book around vulnerability. she quotes a guy that comes to her, and this old man, and says, "See that? There's my wife and there's my daughter over there. They would rather see me fall off my horse. So they would rather see me die than fall off my horse." And I love that expression because it's very true. I think the conversations around men need to be more vulnerable is a very dangerous and tricky conversation to be pushing, because when men start opening up, and they start opening up too much, and there's a level of discernment and a level of balance to what you're doing when you are opening up and how you're being vulnerable. Once you get too far and you start to not be able to emotionally regulate around your partner, they are going to get turned off by that, and they are going to, if it's a long-term thing, they will eventually leave you. And I do believe that, and we can see that playing out. So I think this is why I'm passionate. We need men teaching men how to be men. Yeah, women are trying to, and it comes from a place of love, but they don't understand what it is to be a man. And so the average man is really lonely, really upset, really miserable, and not doing well, but trying his best. I truly believe that they're really trying hard. And so that is what I would say, and that is what I would say men wish women understood, is that we're trying our best, and we're probably not doing too well.
Yeah. And when we look at eradicating toxic masculinity, you shared earlier with me that you think that's a detrimental term towards progress in this regard. So if you could wave a magic wand and come up with a winning formula to get rid of toxic masculinity, where do you think we would start with that?
I would put in place rites of passage again. So I think it's incredibly important that we take boys into manhood, and there's a process that they go through. So if I have a magic wand, what I would do is every single boy would have to go through some form of rites of passage. And I think what we would see is society would dramatically improve overnight, dramatically improve. If every boy had a community of men around him that took them at 14, 15, 16, 17 and took them into manhood, society would skyrocket in terms of every measurement possible. And so I think if we are to heal our young men and heal masculinity and heal men, we need to bring them into manhood. Too many of us don't even know what that is, and don't even know when did you become a man, right? Like, that's a difficult question to answer for a lot of men, and it was a difficult question for me to answer. When I started doing this work and I started delving into it, I came to realize, I'm not a man. I'm not a man. I'm still a boy. I lived 27 years as a boy, and I needed to take myself over the course of 6 months, because I had to do it by myself, but I had to take myself through various rites of passage internally and in my life so that I could step up and become a father and become a man. And I truly believe that now, when I'm asked that question, when did you become a man? I say, when my son was born. And then I had these rites of passage that I underwent in the 6 months leading up to that, the 9 months leading up to that. So we have, and in the research as well, you'll see that a lot of boys and a lot of men don't know what the answer to that question is, but a lot of boys and a lot of men who are in gangs are very clear on their masculinity and very clear on their manhood. And that's because they've taken through some form of rites of passage to enter into a gang. And so that's really interesting. Now, don't go and join a gang. That's not my point. My point is that you can remove the rites of passage from a society, but you can't remove the archetypal need and desire for a rites of passage into manhood. And so that's why we've got so many lost, hurting, and lost and pain. And sorry, that's why we have so many lost young men who are in pain, is because we've taken rites of passage away from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dylan, before we start our chat this afternoon, you shared with me that you recently became a father and you moved from Australia to Hawaii. So tell me, as we wrap up our conversation today, I'm wondering the type of legacy and example you want to be for your newborn child, and way you want your personal and professional legacy to be defined, buddy?
Geez, what a great question. I think my legacy that I want to leave behind is rooted in empathy and in kindness. I want people to know that I had a big heart and that I really cared for others. And I want that to translate down into my son, that he has a big heart and he cares for other people. Um, and a part of that as well in being a leader and being of service. So that is what I want my legacy to be, is that he was a heart-led man. He was a heart-led leader. That would be my legacy if I could summarize it briefly. And the main values that I'd like to instill into my son are kindness and empathy and compassion, but also resilience and leadership, and to be of service.
Yeah, how do you think we can best celebrate prosperity from a collective and individual standpoint?
Geez, that's a great question. How can we celebrate prosperity? Gratitude. I think gratitude is the answer. I think when you're grateful, that's a form of celebration and a form of internal celebration. I've really honed in my gratitude practice to the point where I'm waking up, I'm grateful. I sit down to work, I'm grateful. I hold my son, I'm grateful. I kiss my partner, I'm grateful. It's just in everything that I do, I'm just so grateful. And I think that's the foundation of a good mindset, is being grateful. And then you're always celebrating your wins, and you're celebrating not only your wins, but you're just celebrating life because you're grateful. Oh man, I'm so, my coffee's at the moment, newborn son, not sleeping a lot. Like, I'm drinking my coffee, and this is like the best part of my day almost, is having my coffee. And so I'm really grateful. I'm grateful for the sunset, the sunrise, the warm weather, everything. When you just weave gratitude throughout your entire life will change.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, Dylan, tell me, if people want to get connected with you, buddy, what's the best way they can do that?
Dylan.Roos on Instagram. So that's DYLAN.ROOS on Instagram. Any form of social media. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on YouTube. Just type in Dylan Roos. My website is dylanrooscoaching.com. You can check out my work there. And yeah, reach out. I respond to everyone that reaches out to me. And I try my best to get back to everyone as quickly as I can.
Fabulous. Well, Dylan, I really enjoyed engaging in conversation with you about male masculinity, inclusion, diversity, equity, and so much more, buddy. Your work in the space and time on my behalf is most appreciated. And I want to thank you for engaging in conversation with me.
Thank you, brother. This is by far one of the best podcasts I've ever done. You are an incredible host, and you asked some very good questions there that I haven't been asked before. So keep up the great work.